Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Supporting Infant Mental Health, and to the over 300 people who've joined us today, and also to any of the viewers who are watching later on. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. We're meeting in many different parts of Australia today, so it's a broad acknowledgement. We're paying our respects to elders past, present and future, holding the memories, traditions, culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. Okay, so I can already see that we've got some people introducing themselves through the chat box, and people are joining us from those locations I mentioned all throughout Australia. So feel free to say hello and let us know where you're located for tonight's discussion. As you know, our webinar this afternoon is run by Kids Matter, and we welcome the Kids Matter, the health and community professionals, and also early childhood audiences that are there tonight, or this afternoon. Often these webinars are run at night, so I might say that a few times. And I'm hoping that you will have all read the case study that was provided to help us with this afternoon's discussion. And if you need to find that and have a look at that again, it's available with all the documents that are available for the webinar. Okay, so just to introduce myself and the panel, I'm Jo Cole, and I'll be facilitating this afternoon's session. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've worked with a wide range of age groups, including very young children and infants, both clinically and in mental health promotion, prevention and early intervention. Some of you might know that I was with Kids Matter Early Childhood from the beginning, so it holds a very dear place in my heart. And I've moved on job-wise, but I'm still a very big advocate for the project itself, and also very young children's mental health, and so I'm very pleased to be involved with the webinar today. I haven't actually facilitated one of these webinars before, but I have been involved in the background, so I kind of understand how they work, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to keep it all together and run it this afternoon. And because I've been involved in so many of these, I know you'll really enjoy what you'll learn and what discussion is going to happen. It's going to be great. So we have a really fantastic panel for you this afternoon. We have Professor Jeanette Milgram, who's also a clinical psychologist. We have Linda McDonald, who's a child and family nurse, and Karen Winderlich, an early childhood educator. And they will be taking you through their responses to the case study this afternoon, and we'll also get a chance to ask them lots of questions through writing in the chat box, which I'll explain more about in a moment. So on the slide that should come up for you now, you can see the ground rules. So this is just to ensure that we all have the opportunity to gain the most from this webinar. So just consider the following: being respectful of other participants and panellists. Be mindful of taking care of yourself during the session. Sometimes when we talk about mental health difficulties and mental illness, it can trigger some of our own issues. If you've got any comments or questions, as I mentioned, you can type those into the general chat box, which is the first box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any issues with technical issues, please type that into the technical help chat box. And just remember that any comment that you make can be seen by everybody, and so it'd be great to keep that on topic. If that chat box is driving you a bit crazy and it's a bit distracting, you can actually hide it by clicking the small down arrow at the top of the chat box. And there's just one more thing I would ask you, that you, when you leave the webinar at the end of this afternoon, could you please complete the short exit survey, which will pop up as you exit the webinar. Okay, and we've also just got here, before we get started, just a reminder of what the learning outcomes are for this afternoon's webinar. So we're going to have this interdisciplinary panel discuss with us the case study about baby Cooper and his parents, Rebecca and Paul. And I hope that we're going to through this presentation and also through our discussion, have a really great chance to think more about how important it is to consider mental health in infancy, think about how we can address those infant and parental risk factors, looking also for protective factors, and also think about some interventions supporting the young children and their families. A reminder that it's a fictional case study that's based on the experience of the panellists, and obviously we don't have every single detail in this case study because we're looking to, I guess, be open-ended so that we can raise questions and provoke thought and generate discussion. I'll just recap a little bit about the case study. This case study focuses on baby Cooper and his parents, Rebecca and Paul. After some struggles with infertility and a difficult birth, Rebecca was having trouble connecting with Cooper and did actually describe him as a difficult baby. He's recently started childcare in order to give Rebecca some respite and give her a bit of a break. So before we hear from the panellists tonight, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some definitions of infant mental health. I was just saying before we logged on tonight that I'm still surprised to hear lots of people say when I mention infant mental health, really, infant mental health? So I think it's really important to remind ourselves if we already know and to learn a bit more about it if this is the first time we're starting to think about infant mental health. So I've popped a definition of infant mental health up here on the slide, and that's taken and slightly adapted from a great resource that you can go and look at yourself after tonight's webinar, which is from America, 0to3.org. We don't actually have a similar kind of resource in Australia, and this American resource is quite useful. And in their work, which is quite substantial with children from birth to age 3, they define infant mental health as the healthy social and emotional development of a child from conception to 3 years. And infant mental health is also a growing multidisciplinary field of research and practice devoted to that healthy social and emotional development. And we're not just looking at clinical interventions where we might provide some kind of support or treatment for the issues that might arise in that period. We're also looking at promotion and even prevention of mental health problems. Another definition that I'll pop up on the screen now, and you do have access to this slide presentation in the documents for tonight if you haven't already found them. This is a definition that we've used in Kids Matter Early Childhood to talk about early childhood mental health, which is the same age group really. We're talking about young children's social, emotional and behavioural wellbeing that includes their developing capacity to experience, regulate and express emotion and to form close, secure and satisfying relationships and to explore and discover the environment and the world around them. So there we're really talking about their social, emotional and behavioural wellbeing. So that just explains it a little bit in more detail about what we might be talking about. And for every age that a child is, they have some capacity in that area. So even the brand new born child or even the child before they're born is already taking in information and developing and growing and starting to learn each of these skills. And the last point I think is something that we'll come back to quite a lot tonight, so it's important to remember it, and I'm sure that a lot of you already are fully aware of this, but we know that young children learn skills for this through their relationships, and primarily their relationships with their most significant caregivers, usually their parents, their mother and their father, or another important caregiver that they may spend most of their time with. And in Kids Matter Early Childhood, we really like to connect that too with the relationship that children and families can develop with their early childhood educators. And we'll hear from a teacher tonight who works in this period and who'll share her experience and knowledge in that area as well. So that's a little bit more about what we mean when we say infant mental health, and there's plenty of resources available for you to learn a little bit more about that if you've got any more questions, and potentially if you do have other questions about that, please make sure you're noting those for the Q&A section when we get there. Okay, so we're Just ready to now hopefully move on to hear from our panellists. Looks like we're making pretty good time so far. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Professor Jeanette Milgram, who's going to talk to this case study from her perspective as a clinical psychologist. Thanks, Jeanette.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here, and it's hard not being able to see you all, but I look forward to your questions. So I'll jump off the definition of infant mental health and quote Winnicott, who many of you would have heard of, when he said that infant mental health is best understood in the context of the mother-infant or parent-infant, caregiver-infant relationship, and that the phrase, there's no such thing as a baby, is meant to focus our attention on, with a baby as young as Cooper, the interdependence of the infant on his or her parents. So as you can see, I'm at the Parent-Infant Research Institute, and this is the work that I do. So moving on to the next slide that I have, we've each been asked just to give a very quick response to some of our thoughts about the case, and then we look forward to your questions. So for me, when I saw the information, which is quite a small amount of information, as Joe said, to me it raised questions about the need, given we understand infant mental health in the context of his parents, the importance of understanding how the family and the contribution of each party is relating to the presenting parent-infant difficulties. And if I start off with Rebecca, what it also highlights for me is that there is a need to understand a bit more about Rebecca's mental health. There are sufficient clues there to wonder about her depression or anxiety. She might have had a past history too that would make her vulnerable. She certainly had a lot of life stresses around the IVF and her labour and IVF. And also understand her in a psychosocial context of other protective factors so that we can understand how to best help Rebecca and the importance of the impact of depression and anxiety on the parent-infant relationship. So Rebecca may need help with some general issues apart from depression or anxiety, which she seems to be struggling with, including her expectations of what motherhood was going to be like. It sounds like she had quite different expectations. She was very disappointed about the birth. She had difficulties postpartum, and these obviously need to be acknowledged. Her grief at not having had natural birth, breastfeeding, and of course, one has to recognise the stress of the IVF procedure itself. Cooper, if we turn to Cooper, is described at one point as a difficult baby. Now, what does this mean? What do we know about the emotional needs of infants to promote infant mental health? Is Cooper temperamentally difficult, a baby who is more difficult to console, more irritable? Or are we looking actually at the relationship, and that Cooper is difficult in the context of the relationship? And a very key concept in early infancy to promote infant mental health is responsive caregiving, which promotes secure attachment. And so we can ask ourselves, here we have a case of Rebecca who's feeling very insecure and not sure about her skills. Is she appropriately responding to her baby's cue in a sensitive manner? What is her own self-confidence as a parent? And is part of the difficulty that she doesn't know exactly how to read him? What about Cooper in childcare? Was this a good decision? It's likely to have fed into Rebecca's possible early attachment difficulties. We hear the word of him being described as a stranger, which is perhaps a clue. Maybe there are fears that Paul is a better parent. And we also have to wonder whether Cooper's distress at childcare is actually an abnormal distress, or it's part of the normal settling, which actually reflects a secure attachment. And we also need to make sure that all the psychologists, the GP, everyone, and childcare are all working together for the best outcome with the parents and Rebecca. What about partner, Paul, and family support? Does Rebecca have support from her family? We know that's a huge protective factor. So I haven't gone through the risk and protective factors, but also relationship quality with Paul. What's happening there? There's not a lot of clues there, but that's a really important issue to consider. So in the brief time I've got, I'm finishing with where do we go from now? Management. How do we assess and treat Rebecca's possible depression and anxiety, plus contributing factors and couple communication, if on assessment we need them? And here at the Parent Infant Research Institute, we've developed specialised postnatal depression programs, both face-to-face, a Mum Mood Booster internet program. But we might also need to supplement that very specific target of maternal mood with attachment issues and ways of helping Rebecca with programs such as there are many around, and you'll hear from other speakers of others, but we've developed a happiness, understanding, giving and sharing. So I'll leave you with those thoughts, and I'll also invite you all to look at the Marseille Society Perinatal Mental Health Conference coming up this year. We're very fortunate, I'm president of the Society at the moment, to have an international conference in Melbourne where all these things will be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. I know that we've just done a really quick tour through all the amazing wisdom that you would have to share with us. So hopefully we'll be able to come back and get you to give us a little bit more detail when it's time for question and answer time. So we'll move forward now to our next panellist, Linda. So Linda is a child and family nurse and is going to talk to us about how we might work as a maternal and child health or a child and family nurse with this family.
Hi, I guess the webinar is new to me, so bear with me as I take this initial step, and welcome to everybody who's listening, and I look forward to the questions that you'll pose to us later. I guess the first thing I'd really want to draw people's attention to is the definition that Jo provided, that it starts at conception up until 3 years. I think that's a really important thing to recognise, that parents during the antenatal period are more likely to have well-connected babies afterwards. So I guess when I initially looked at the case study, it was very obvious that there were some sort of vulnerabilities with this particular family, some sitting with Rebecca, and perhaps some may even sit with her partner, Paul. And for us, it's around the fact that, she's got a long history of infertility, that could have caused some financial stress and emotional stress, that they've been doing a lot of reading and a lot of preparation in regard to having this little baby, and they're very much looking forward to it. So therefore there's a certain expectation set, which I think is an important thing to acknowledge. Postnatally, the delivery didn't go as planned. There was issues with her breastfeeding, and there might be grief around that. We weren't sure whether she continued to breastfeed or whether she weaned. There's also the fact that Paul, as a primary caregiver, took over the care, and that was really difficult for Mum. And then he returned to work, and that transition to me sounded like it was really important. Had they shared Cooper's care, or did Paul just go back to work and, Rebecca was in a position that she had to work it out for herself? So there's a lot of factors. Protective factors are around the relationship between Paul and Rebecca, the support of extended family, the openness with which Rebecca appears to be willing to communicate how she's feeling. Is she telling people? And, she went to the GP and she disclosed how she was feeling. So, there are a few things that you would hope would be protective for this little family. From an early intervention point of view, we do a lot of antenatal and postnatal screenings, such as the Edinburgh Scale, or we do a perinatal psychosocial assessment. So that's around getting in early with these families to put supports in place so that things go along as well as they can. One thing maternal and child health nurses do is they are able to home visit, which I think is a huge advantage for this family. We can also offer continuity, that often they're able to see the same nurse in clinics or at home, and that makes it easier to establish a relationship, develop trust, and to work in partnership. We certainly start where the client's at, what they need for their baby and for themselves in order to sort of feel competent as parents. And we certainly explore and prioritise about what do they need, what are we starting with, and not to overwhelm them with a lot of stuff in the beginning. And we have one step at a time. We sit down and we make a plan with the family. We work in partnership. We don't do it to them. They are a very important part of working out where to from here. We identify what they need, what they want to achieve, and this is done in a very informal way. It's just through conversation and taking histories and recognising what their needs and what their issues are. And then on a regular visit, either at a clinic or a home visit, the match nurse will certainly review and reflect on the family's progress. How's things going for you? How are you feeling? How's Cooper going? And that's collecting information to allow us to assist in this adjustment period and to promote that relationship between the primary caregiver, whether it's mum or whether it's dad, and just put a bit of planning in about how that all works. I guess moving to the next slide, we would usually then go on to use a strengths-based approach, which means that we're wanting to build capacity and confidence with mum or dad, whoever's caring. And in this case, I think Rebecca has probably been knocked around as far as her confidence is concerned. When things don't go as planned, mums often lose confidence in the way they feel they can do things. So in the home environment, we can observe how Rebecca goes with Cooper and how they interact together, and if Dad's home, we can do the same thing. And it's in their home environment, which I think gives nurses a special opportunity. And we're able to observe the interaction between mother and baby and find sort of positive things that are happening within that relationship and building on those positives to encourage and to facilitate this really important connection. We would normally involve other supports with the partner, extended family, and if it was appropriate, to connect to their community, such as new parent groups and pansy groups for depression and things like that. So, having that experience with other mothers and babies and see how it's working for others. They may discover they're not alone with some of the concerns and things that they have. We provide a consistent follow-up and referral as required, to the doctor, social worker, or perinatal mental health might be another option. But it is around working as a team, having a consistent approach. All of those things are sort of a high priority. And moving on to the next slide. Well, we work in a multidisciplinary team. And to do this, we sort of really need to obtain the consent from the client to share information. We often ring GPs. We often may liaise with mental health. We sort of keep in touch if perhaps a mum may be admitted to hospital with a mental health issue, and we actually go in and see mum and baby. If it's an adult facility, they aren't always baby mother focused. They may be more focused on the mental illness. So the nurse is able to bring that mother-baby focus into the hospital with mum, especially if baby is with mum. If not, we give support to dad at home, who may not be used to managing baby as much as suddenly they find that they have to. So I guess we work collaboratively. We try to communicate and be inclusive. You want to be on the same page because these parents are already stressed and they really don't need any kind of contradiction in information and suggestions and things like that. And I think it's very important to be respectful of other professionals' expertise and, deferring to whomever's appropriate, Nurses do sleep and settling really well and doctors may do medication really well. So it's about respecting other professionals in their capacities. We use various models, a helping model, which is the nurse-family partnership model, which is around assuming a helping role within that family over time. We utilise circles of security, which is very much an attachment-based process, and they're both really focused on the relationships of mum, dad and baby, of Paul, Rebecca and Cooper, and they also focus on the relationship of the nurse. As that promotes those connections. I guess the other thing I'd have to add that it's important for nurses they don't always have the ability to have reflective practice or supervision at work. And when you're doing intensive work with families with complex issues, it's really important to have that support for your professional practice and development along with the education. Thanks.
And that's it from you, Linda?
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Linda. I think everybody who works with children and families knows how important maternal and child health and child and family nurses are to supporting all of the families, especially across the whole of Australia. So, I think that that's really reflected in what you have presented to us today. So now we're going to move on to Karen, who is an early childhood educator and teacher. And I'll hand over to you now, Karen.
Thank you. When I first read this scenario, I thought, wow, what a really complex scenario. And it seems that the experience of this family has been one challenging set of circumstances really after another. And then into this set of circumstances and experiences arrives a whole new world of childcare for Cooper as well as for Rebecca and for Paul. So what's the role of the educators in the lives of these people and in the life and the living and the learning for Cooper in particular? For a start, high quality programs in education and care settings are just that. They're education and care, and in fact the two are so tightly wound together that one can't really unfold fully without the other. And when we start thinking about care and education, we have to start at the heart of everything, and that's relationships. Relationships really underpin all that we do as educators as we work with and alongside children and their families. So the relationships are, it's really important to have these relationships with families and also the relationships with the children. In order to know Cooper in this scenario, in order to know Cooper really deeply, we first need to know his family. We really need to know what he's working so hard to communicate. In order to really, truly and effectively support Cooper in his health and well-being and therefore his learning, we need to also support his family and their well-being. And as Cooper and his family transition into a childcare setting, these early days are absolutely critical to the formation of the close and trusted relationships that form the foundation for doing just this. So this is when the partnerships are born, and this is where and when these lasting connections are formed between families and educators. And based on these really strong relationships, we can offer Cooper and his family a framework, if you like, of support and care and understanding and knowledge about how to best provide the opportunities and the possibilities that Cooper and every child, in fact, deserves and needs for their well-being and for their learning. And this may well include widening that partnership to include other professionals, such as the maternal and child health nurse, to support this family, and perhaps Rebecca in particular, with Cooper's routine needs and also with those attachment relationships which seem to have had a bit of a rough start. But as educators, we know that all learning, all play, all growing, developing, exploring, discovering, all of that is carried out only when children are feeling really safe and secure in a nurturing and supportive environment. And when we're working with our youngest children, this safe, nurturing environment is created when they are really wrapped up in the respectful and responsive and consistent and loving care of a primary educator or a primary caregiver, if you like. And given Cooper's experiences, I guess, to this point in time, and what seems to have been rather a disrupted attachment-forming period, it would be even more important to have that one special person who is available to him emotionally and cognitively. When I say available, I mean available in every way, not just physically. And that person would have the role to listen to him and to be cued in with really great sensitivity to his smallest movements and gestures and glances and vocalisations, to respond to all of his efforts to communicate what he's feeling and what he's needing and what he's thinking, and to celebrate all of his efforts and achievements with him and with his family as well, and to provide those safe and welcoming arms even when times are really challenging for him Actually, especially, I guess, when those times are really challenging. So relationships really come first. Positive, secure attachment relationships come first. The second role that I'd like to highlight is around the educator's role in sharing their knowledge and understanding and noticing of Cooper's competence, his strengths and interests and learning directions. Babies are, without doubt, the most amazing and inspirational learners of all. Children are born wonderfully well-equipped as learners, and they're ready to plunge headlong into a world of ideas and an exploration of things and relationships from the moment they're born, and actually quite probably even before. In the world of early childhood education, our national curriculum document, Belonging, Being and Becoming, is built on the understanding that children are capable learners from birth. So when we as educators have an image of the competent child, when we have an image of Cooper as a competent child, born to learn, born to connect, born to actively create meaning and to follow his own unique compass of curiosity, then we have a responsibility to make this visible. And when we join our voice to Cooper's, when we join our attention to Cooper's, we can do no less than to share the precious and powerful stories of extraordinary learning that we see and hear as he uses really seemingly ordinary experiences and moments to unravel the essence of his world. And as we do this, we are taking on the role of advocates for him. As we share ideas and joys and questions and our wonder at Cooper and his learning through conversations and through documentation that we might record, we can work in really subtle ways to gently challenge and shift an image of Cooper from difficult to a joint celebration of him as someone who is rich in the skills and energy needed to live and to learn and to flourish. So in this really supportive and respectful relationship and partnership with his parents, we can offer them, Rebecca and Paul, perhaps a new way to see and hear and understand and respond to Cooper. When we advocate for him as a strong and competent learner, we have the potential to open up opportunities that enrich the environment and the relationships and the experiences that are created for and with him. He deserves nothing less. Actually, all children deserve nothing less.
Okay, well, thank you, Karen. I really appreciated that beautiful, warm picture of what it would be like for Cooper if he was with you or your early childhood educators that you work with. That was a really lovely picture of the way that you can look at a baby and the way that you can see, in this case, Cooper's abilities and skills and readiness to learn and his role in the relationships that he's got all around him. That was fantastic. So we finished with the interdisciplinary case response section of the webinar for tonight, and we're going to move on to our question and answer session. We do have quite a long time for question and answers, half an hour. So I know that some of you will have already been putting questions into the general chat box. We've also had the panel suggest some questions that might be of interest to the people attending the webinar tonight. And we've also got a long list of questions that people have submitted when you're asked to do when you registered for the webinar. So I'm going to be trying to get some questions to the panellists and then listening to what they say and looking at what you're asking and trying to get us all talking with each other. And we'll be doing, as I said, we'll be doing that for about the next half an hour. And we're going to try to cover as many of your areas of interest as we possibly can. But of course, we've got a limited period of time, so we'll do what we can. Okay, so I guess that one of the themes that I noticed was coming up in some of the questions that people sent in when they registered was a little bit more about Dad and what services and supports might be available to Dad. So if we could maybe bring up the pictures of our panellists again now, and I would like to ask Linda, do you know of any kinds of services or supports in the community which might provide a little bit more support to Dad, who's obviously taken on quite a strong role of looking after Cooper, and how do we involve dads in when they're not even home, if there's a traditional gender role going on at home, when there's a home visit from the child and family nurse?
I guess these days dads are around through the delivery and they're around through the immediate postnatal period. So often they're certainly offered by midwives all of that information and support that would normally be given to mum, and especially in the circumstance where mum's had a caesarean section, and sometimes dad is actively involved in the care of baby. And I've seen many dads participate in putting babies to the breast and all sorts of things, so they get very hands-on. I guess when the maternal and child health nurse visits for that first visit, it's hopefully within a relatively short time after discharge. And certainly, again, Dad is offered, they're just part of a package, a family, and they're certainly offered the same information, the same kind of support, and sometimes even a little bit of mediation between mum and dad when there's a bit of discussion about what's the appropriate way to go or what happens. I think dads tend to obviously return to work, and I think these days there's an increased reliance on accessing information via the internet. And I think in some ways dads are certainly disadvantaged because they do return to work. Sometimes we do have dads who care full-time for their children later on, and they certainly access clinics and, general child types of environments. As a rule, I think supporting dads is not done as well as supporting mums. And that's around access for dad. When does he get the opportunity to go? He does get to go to immunisation often because finds that difficult. And I think dads are much more hands-on than they were previously, but there's not as much support for dads out there, to be really honest.
That's right, and I think that, since I've been working in the field, I've noticed it's only become a lot more of a theme, and even the roles of dads have changed in that short period of time, but it's good to hear that, there's a sense of the family unit and that people are looking at, other kinds of ways that fathers can get access to that help and support. While I've got you there too, Linda, I certainly want to have other questions with other members of the panel, which we will get to in a sec, but I've just noticed there's quite a lot of people who are really excited and impressed with the breadth of the maternal and child health service that you've described. And given that you're based in Canberra, I assume you're talking about what's available in Canberra. Do you know anything about whether that's available more broadly across Australia in the same way?
I think in most states of Australia there is maternal and child health or child and family nurses, and they offer a very similar service in regard to home visits or clinics, but it's all relative, like many things, as to budget, so that the form that it takes may change, but it's there. All of the services would usually offer an extra additional support for families who are particularly vulnerable. Here in the ACT it's called the PEPS program, and that's where a nurse will home visit for an extended period of time, just the same nurse to the same family, which again establishes that relationship and enables that ongoing support, which is so important for vulnerable families.
That's right, and I think if people are interested in what might be happening in their local area, maybe they can contact their local child health or community health centres and find out more about. A
lot of the services are also based through councils, and they're very regionally based. So that's probably what is another source. So it depends on who manages the services for mothers and babies and dads.
Yeah, okay. Well, now we've got lots of questions coming through about education, and I'm really keen to get onto that in a minute, so we'll let Karen be warned that I'm coming for her. But I was actually going to ask Jeanette a really important question that people are really interested in whenever we talk about interventions for working with families. I was wondering if Jeanette would be able to provide a little bit more information for us about what an intervention with a mother and a baby or a family and a baby might look like if there is attachment difficulty.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jo. Yes, I think that, I totally agree with everything that's been said, and as Karen talked about, when we work with a mother and an infant, and I think that we need to take a very strength-based approach and a very positively reinforcing approach. You really certainly don't want to undermine and make parents feel a failure because you're wanting to work on the parent-infant relationship. So we tend to work with the strengths and what we see and understand are important elements. So the important elements have been mentioned, and they're key really to all the intervention programs and all our work. We work very closely with maternal and child health nurses too, and Circle of Security and our own HUGS program, where I would divide it into three parts. Like the first part would be helping parents observe and understand who their baby is and what baby talk is, and you'll get a range of parents, some who can do that very well and some who really find it quite difficult. And by using play as a medium, you can, and we use a playgroup setting, you can really do it in a very non-threatening environment where you then start to pick up on very positive times when we are having the sorts of interactions that we know are important to building an infant's sense of self, eye gaze, appropriate responsiveness, respecting baby cues, and so on. So one is those exact capacities to interact that we know from the literature are important, which we've shown in our own group work, and which there's now good clinical evidence are important. Secondly, we sometimes have to deal with what's going on cognitively in the background, like a mum might find that her baby is not looking at her a lot. She might have gone through a depressed period, for example, and the baby has learned to avert her gaze, or sometimes the baby just needs to pause. So it's very important to work and challenge some of the negative thinkings that get in the way, like my baby doesn't like me, I'm no good, I'm a failure. So you're working with the parent-infant intervention both at the here and now level and also in terms of how the mother is feeling, and then helping the mum sort of develop her confidence and her fun. We certainly find that good mother-baby groups are full of joy and full of we use music and so on to facilitate really that bonding and that babies are resilient, and you really see a very quick trajectory of success once you start things going a little better where things have been difficult. So that's
it sounds like something that Rebecca, it sounds like something that Rebecca in our case study could really benefit from. So I hope she does get access to something like that. We've got lots and lots of questions about from educators here, and so I'd like to start to try and get through a couple of those. So I've got a question now for Karen from Tiffany Juris. Karen, do you think that Cooper would also benefit from the educators inviting mum to attend childcare, maybe to play with Cooper at the time that he's in childcare, so that they can help her see his achievements and also help with their bonding through play?
Absolutely. I think, particularly at the beginning when children and families are transitioning to childcare, and I say family transitioning to childcare because that transition period, that really critical period at the beginning where those relationships are starting, is a transition period absolutely for families as well, not just for the children. And there are all sorts of things that we can do in those initial stages to make sure that those relationships are really strong and supportive and close and respectful for everybody. And part of that can be and should be having a lot of visits before the child actually begins formal days in childcare, I guess. And those visits that the children can have with their families, the babies can have with their families, are all about the families getting to know the educators really well so that the educators can then work with them and support them in their roles. So having families come into the childcare setting is a wonderful way to build on the child's competence and to also build on the family's competence. And I would just say in this case, in this scenario, on Rebecca's competence. And there are a whole lot of really subtle but really significant ways that we can support Rebecca in her relationship with Cooper. And it might be as simple as the words that we use when we are describing Cooper to her, and we're describing what we've seen him do during the day and what we've heard him say with his voice, and how we can see that he's using, a particular type of gesture to communicate something. And then, as part of that relationship, we also need to be really good listeners. So we need to be prepared to listen to Rebecca also, and in that listening, we can be sharing with her some of the things that we see that are really positive around the ways that she interacts with Cooper and the ways that he responds also to her. To build on those small moments, can seem like something that's really not important or insignificant, but actually in the big picture, those little moments, those tiny moments are of something really positive between Rebecca and Cooper can become, the foundation for building onto more and more of those positive interactions that they will have. So it can start from us noticing not just Cooper, but from us noticing Rebecca and the way that she's interacting with him. So I would say absolutely yes, and I think every childcare setting should have, all families should be feeling welcomed to come and spend time whenever during the day. That's their place and their space as much as it is for the children. So absolutely, I think that's a wonderful way to support Rebecca.
Thanks, Karen. I've also noticed that we've got lots of people asking about what circle of security is. Would any of the panelists like to volunteer to talk a little bit more about that? Anyone can jump in.
Yes, circle of security is a wonderful model for helping caregivers, I suppose, families as well as those who are educators like myself, to understand the relationship between the caregiver and the child. And the circle of security is actually a circle, and there are a pair of outstretched hands on one side, and the circle will go all the way around. So on one half of the circle, we have the child moving out and exploring and playing, and the child will only go out and explore and play and learn when they are feeling really safe and secure. When they're not feeling safe and secure, they need to have a safe base to go back to. So they will go back to those hands that are outstretched. So there is a person in a childcare setting that will be the primary caregiver or primary educator who is there to support them with their emotions and with their physical needs, and when they are just needing to check back in. So sometimes a child will check back in when they're feeling unsafe just with a visual glance, or they may actually physically come over and need a cuddle or need something else from that person. So it's like a circle, and the safe hands are always there. They are the strong, kind, wise hands that are there always to support the child, to find joy and to share joy with them when they're moving out and they're exploring and playing and working out what their place is in this world and how the whole wide world works. But they are also there when the child is not feeling safe and secure and is looking for that extra support.
Thanks, Karen. And I also know that if the circle of security information isn't already included in the useful resources that are part of this webinar, I can't remember off the top of my head.
It is.
Certainly make sure it is, yes. Well, so that's there's a lot of free resources that can be downloaded, but I do know that training is provided in Australia from time to time. It can be quite expensive to train as a facilitator of that intervention, but there are lots of resources available to anybody in the community, to parents and to educators and to clinicians who are interested in finding out more about that model. We've got a lot of people who are interested in finding out, firstly, about what services might be available. And obviously we can't answer what services are available in your local area because we are a national and I think international webinar tonight. I think this afternoon, I think we have a few people from outside Australia, so we can't actually answer specifically in your area. But I was wondering if Linda, if you'd be able to answer a general question about what other kinds of resources you might be able to refer a family to if it becomes outside of the capacity for either for them to just link back in with their universal service like a maternal and child health service, or it's too much for the early childhood education service. And obviously we already know a little bit about the kinds of interventions that Jeanette's described. Do you know of any other kinds of services that we could refer families to for support if we were looking for somewhere to send them?
I guess, again, my knowledge is more locally based. So we have what we call child and family centres here in the ACT that are usually located in areas of growth where there's lots of new mums and babies and children. And they usually offer a single point of contact that will refer on, as well as groups within the centres themselves. There's also a lot of good internet resources. You have to be very critical and assess their appropriateness, and only recommend those ones that are well recognised and well researched and updated and all of those sorts of things. And yeah, it's a bit of a search within your local areas and finding a resource that is appropriate for the particular needs of a particular family. I think to that's where that relationship and working out exactly what it is that the family is looking for and seeing if you can match that up with particular services. And it's mainly just local knowledge, and you have to sometimes go out and find out. You just have to check it out and see what's around.
And I certainly know that's part of Kids Matter. If you're in an early childhood service that's doing Kids Matter early childhood, part of what you'll be doing is looking for what services are available to support the families in your local area. So it is local knowledge. Just to give people some other hints and tips, Jeanette, I was wondering, you've talked a little bit about the services that are available where you are. Do you know of any other kinds of services that people might look out for to refer families to, Jeanette?
Oh, hi. Well, I think that certainly we're based in Victoria, but we also work nationally. But we really are very lucky to have a great maternal and child health service. So we have enhanced nurses who may have specialist skills and run special play groups for mothers and babies. Certainly, there's a smattering of services in terms of specialists who work particularly with mothers and babies, but you do have to hunt for them. But I'm glad to say that with the development of things like Circle of Security, I've noticed a lot of comments of people talking about, well, what is it? It's expensive to get trained. You know, a lot of people can do some of the training without becoming facilitators and understand the principles of what's needed to promote secure attachment. So I think there's a lot of ways that a lot of professionals from different disciplines, such as everyone here on the panel, can do to upskill themselves to be able to help mothers and infants with difficulties. And certainly we find in our own training programs that, health professionals, do take up this material well. So the maternal and child health system is probably the best, and then you have your specialist psychologists, psychiatrists who sometimes specialise in parent-infant work.
So just for people's information, if you thought that a family might need a referral to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, what would be the best thing to advise the family about that? Sorry, Jo, did you say if a family wanted to be referred to a psychologist or a psychiatrist? Yeah, well, just wondering about the pathway. How might they get from their early childhood education service when people think, oh yes, I think this is a bit of a bigger problem than just us, then just we can handle and the family needs more support. What would be a good way to go from that to finding a psychologist or a psychiatrist intervention? Yes, well, as you know, Jo, there are various routes. I mean, you can actually go to the Australian Psychological Society and find a psychologist yourself, and then would need a GP referral to see the psychologist. And the good news is that with the mental health care plan, you can sort of be largely rebated by Medicare to see a psychologist. So that's really increased the capacity. Then, hopefully I would like to think that there are some psychologists who particularly specialise in this area and are upskilled to do that.
And then more and more people, including, we're finding that we're doing more and more telephone work as well, and you have places like, so you would be sort of working both face-to-face and potentially in other ways, and more, as we've heard, in other supportive ways. With mother-baby work, the face-to-face work is the best. With supporting the mental health, you can use a whole range of other delivery modes.
Thank you very much for that. That's great. And yeah, there certainly are some people who are able to specialise in the community in supporting mothers and babies, which is lovely to see. And one of the purposes, I guess, of having people from different professions talk on the panel tonight is for us to talk about collaboration. So I think it's time for us to have a think about that. One of the questions that came in before the webinar this afternoon was about how can people work together. So how can maternal and child health nurses, psychologists, educators, GPs, all of the people who might be involved with families, how can they work well together to support a family? So each of the panellists has actually talked about how important that is, and how that's crucial for supporting the family. I was wondering, Karen, if you had any specific examples of how collaboration could occur if you're based, in a childcare centre and you wanted to work with those other services involved with the family that came to your centre.
Yes. First of all, I think it's really important that centres and settings have information from local professionals who can help, so that family and have that really visible as well and accessible for all of the families who are at the centre, so that they know that there is actually help, to be had. But I think sometimes families can get quite isolated and actually, not realise that there are actually people who are able to support them through some really difficult and challenging times. So having that information in the setting, and making it really visible, I suppose, is the very first step. And then based on really close and trusted relationships with the families, that's when you can have those conversations about what it is that what it is that you can see, and perhaps some ideas that you might have of people that they can go to access some support. And you can really only do that when you have those relationships in place. The relationships that you have with families really are the heart of everything that we do, and it's based on that you can make those suggestions, I guess, about where to turn to. And then along with that, make sure that the families themselves know that they can talk to you about, what professionals they are seeing and perhaps what advice they're getting and what help they're getting, so that you can also build on those same areas that they're working on when the children are at the centre. So making sure that there's not one way of doing things at home and another way of doing things at the centre. We want consistency as much as possible between all of the environments that these children are experiencing.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We're coming to the end now of the time for the questions and answers. So I was thinking maybe it might be a good idea for us to just get any final comments or any summing up of everybody's reflection. So I'll go in the order of the presenters. I'm just going back to you, Jeanette. Do you have any final words or anything else you wanted to add to what's been said this afternoon?
Well, I've really enjoyed seeing the comments come up in the general chat, because the energy and the interest and the positive is just fantastic. And I'd like to sort of know what everybody's going to do and after this. And I saw some questions about the Marseille conference and Peri as well on the questions. So on the slides, which people have available, are the websites. But I'll just do a 2-second promo of the Marseille conference, because really that's in Melbourne, and the website is on my last slide, but it really will have a parent-infant stream where there will be work together with the Australian Psychological Society of a joint pre-conference workshop on developing skills in mother-infant therapies and so on. So, I think it's a great conversation, and I love the multidisciplinary panel, because I think it's us all working together that creates a fantastic outcome. So that's my main message.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, so just heading over to Linda now. Is there anything you'd want to add or sum up from?
I think it's really important to let other people, other professionals or services involved with clients, let them know that you're around. So I always make sure to get consent from the parents and find out who else is involved and just let them know I'm around. It's just that if anything comes up in my particular area of expertise, they know they can contact me. And I think that's something that's really important for collaborative work, because if they don't know you're there, if the parent doesn't, is busy doing other stuff and doesn't tell them, then that's a good way of promoting collaboration. And I think that's probably pivotal in this circumstance, is to work together from where the parent's at to encourage that attachment. And it takes time. And yes, the relationships are very important.
And thanks for bringing up about getting consent from families. I'm sure we all know that, but it's a good reminder to make sure that, when you do know who's involved, if you can get that consent, then you've got a bit more freedom to actually make contact and share appropriate information. So thank you very much for that, Linda. So just finally now to Karen, if you had any summing up or any final reflections?
Yeah, I just think, it's really important for educators to understand, that they're working with really precious people and they're to be cherished within those relationships that you establish, but realise also the significance of that in the lives of families. When childcare settings and educators are working to support these, all families in the most, responsive and respectful and consistent way, then we can actually provide a wonderful support for families, all families, not just those that are experiencing challenges and challenging times, but for all families. And we can also support families to really see babies as competent and as strong and as, the most amazing learners of all.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. I think it's really lovely tonight to hear all of our panellists talk about, that lovely strengths base and looking for strengths where families are doing well and helping them build on that. I think that shows what a great field and what an interesting and supportive field that it can be to work with children and young families. And obviously, most of you out there actually do that already, which is why you've tuned in this afternoon. It's been really great to see everybody sharing lots of resources in the chat box and information about services and great resources. I'm going to talk a little bit just before we finish up this afternoon about Kids Matter. Obviously, you will have heard of Kids Matter because we're hosting the webinar this afternoon. But I guess what I really want to make clear is that there's a lot of resources available about early childhood mental health and infant mental health that are free for early childhood educators and health professionals and families on the Kids Matter website. And there's a huge range of resources. There's written resources which you can print out for free. There is videos that you can watch. There's training for staff to do for free. And early childhood education and care services can actually get quite a lot of training for free and support if you join up with Kids Matter. Just some points about Kids Matter on the slide. Broadly, it's an Australian mental health and wellbeing initiative. There's also information and resources for primary schools, if any of you have also worked with children of an older age group. It's actually quite unique because we're looking at bringing together the children, families, and all of the people that are important in their lives. So the early childhood educators or teachers and any other support people can work together through looking at the Kids Matter framework. Obviously, in terms of Kids Matter, one of the most important messages that we want to get out there is that good mental health in childhood lays the foundation for the future. It's never too early for families to start supporting mental health of children, but it's not just about what foundation there is for the future. It's also about what is actually happening right now for the baby. And I think, as Karen said earlier, that every child, deserves no less than that. And I think that's been a lovely message from this afternoon. Please make sure you visit the Kids Matter website and have a look. I've noticed a lot of people excited about taking back the information from this afternoon back to their teams, and I think it's really important to just really, emphasise how much stuff is really there. It can take quite a while to find everything and to really get to know what kind of resources are there. But for the people who are asking about what can I give families and what information can I give families, there's the resource Mental Health Matters is really important to go and have a look. There's lots of great information for families in there as well. Here are all our links. There's, as I said, the Kids Matter website, which is just brimming with fantastic information and support for you. You can subscribe to an e-newsletter, so there's a link there for that. There's a few different e-newsletters that you can look at depending on whether you're interested from a family perspective or whether you're interested from a professional educator perspective. And we've also got social media. We're into the 21st century, so you can join our Facebook pages, Kids Matter for Families, which you might want to recommend to the families that you work with for latest information. There's a Facebook page for early childhood educators, a Facebook page about Kids Matter Primary, and then there's also a joint Twitter account if you're on Twitter, and you can have a look at the latest information about children's mental health and about Kids Matter and what's happening for people who work with children and families. Okay, so I just really want to thank everybody for participating tonight. I'd love to thank our amazing panellists who shared their knowledge and their wisdom with us this afternoon. Everyone's been talking about in the chat box about what a great experience they've had, so I'd really like to thank each of you individually for bringing us your information and your experience. So I think that what really struck me was just a lovely feeling of collaboration and warmth and sharing and care for the children and their families and the babies. I think, that often in society, that because children don't always have their own voice or they don't always have the loudest voice, that they can sometimes miss out on people understanding just what's happening for them. So it's great to see this fantastic group of panellists who have their eye on those children and those babies and those families and looking out for how we can support them the best. And I just know from working in this field for the last 15 years just how much our understanding of this age group has really developed in that time, and it's a real privilege to be involved and to hear what everybody's talked about tonight. And it's also been really lovely to see all the enthusiasm from the people, the 300 now people that are online listening to our webinar and participating really actively and wanting to take back what they've learned. And we wish we could find out more about what you take back and what you learn and what you do from here. But we'll just have to be content with knowing that you're out there doing that. So just finally, I'd just like to make sure that you are encouraged to complete the exit survey before you log out. It comes up when you come out or when you log out of the webinar. And in addition to that, just to let you know that you will receive a certificate of attendance for the webinar within the next couple of weeks. And also, some people have asked whether they'll be able to have access to the webinar, and you will. You'll be able to, within the next couple of days, you'll be sent a link to the recording and the supporting resources, and you'll be able to share those with your colleagues if you think that they would benefit from viewing, although they won't be able to play around in the chat box like you've been able to this afternoon. You will be able to watch all of that. And if you are interested in attending more of these kinds of webinars or even viewing our previous webinars, you can go to that link just where at the bottom of that final slide there, that is kidsmatter.edu.au/webinars. Okay, so I guess that's all for this evening. We've come in pretty well a little bit ahead of time, probably because we knew we had so much to get through tonight and we wanted to make sure we got through all of that. we're really grateful to all of your positive, for all of your positive comments that you have been sending through, and we wish you luck on that journey. So thanks very much and good night.